Hello, I'm Milton Rosenau, responsible for perhaps the most famous contagion study ever done. We've always wondered how we get sick. Contagion studies have been tried throughout history. These contagion studies have mostly failed. Let's look at Pasteur, who worked with rabies.
Pasteur could not transfer rabies in the manner in which it is assumed rabies spreads.
That is by simulating a bite or spreading assumed rabies-infected saliva into other animals. Pasteur was on a mission and nothing would stop him. So, what did he do? He drilled holes in dogs' skulls and injected ground-up decaying spinal cord into the brain of various animals. Yes, I know, just horrible. But this is how they proved contagion. Like always, we just assumed there was some germ that is spread from person to person. My study was going to prove once and for all this elusive proof of contagion. We administered different strains of bacteria into volunteers' nasal tract and throat.
We administered filtered secretions from people with what we call the Spanish flu.
We administered unfiltered secretions as well. No one got sick. So we put 10 volunteers into the quarantine section full of sick and dying patients. Each had close contact, and 10 sick people coughed in the face of each volunteer. And yet again, no one got sick. Not one person. If germ theory were true, someone would have gotten sick.
At that time, I said, we are not quite sure what we know about this disease.
Well, what else could I say? I was working for Harvard Medical, which got grants to fight so-called germs.
Also, if I said germs didn't cause disease, I'd be out of a very prestigious job.
What I should have said was that sick people cannot make others sick by coughing or breathing on them.
I mean, if we're going to follow the science, we need to follow the science.
Germ theory should have ended that day for sure, but there was just too much money involved. Big pharma profits is the only reason why you have been lied to about germ theory. If germs don't cause disease, then there's absolutely zero need for any vaccine. It's time you learn the truth and take responsibility for your own health. Toxins and malnutrition play a role in illness, so please stop injecting poisonous vaccines into your body. Links critiquing my Rosenau study and Spanish flu will be provided in the comments below. Val Zimmer 2 has a huge pinned post debunking germ theory and a free ebook found on Substack.
Well, guys, you have to follow money. I am Hantavirus, and you are not. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and as usual, good luck. I'm going to talk about a very important issue, and where does all these infection, contagion, mumbo jumbo come from? We're going to know in a minute. We're going to discuss this matter, this issue, and how important it is. That it's so important that actually viruses do not exist, and neither do bacteria. It's bullshit. It's all BS. The biggest BS ever. That's why you guys, before you follow the videos and follow the money, like Elon Musk said, or Felon Musk, you gotta get this book. You gotta get this book as soon as possible from Amazon. I'm a Mason. Amazon. There you have it. And that's the biggest scam in history, the biggest scam ever. Con Rivers and Ricardo Delgado from Quinta Columna and Stefan Lanka. This is a book I would like to read 30 years ago, but unfortunately there was no willingness on the part of Disney scientists and Nobel laureates to publish this data, which was kept in a very small academic and governmental circle. The biggest scam in history investigates the germ theory and whether it holds up to scientific and empirical scrutiny, and it does not, as I've been explaining for many different videos. This must be the 100th or 1000th video that I've been talking about viruses. I've been talking about and having all these series of viruses and bacteria and talking about them and what disease really is. Disease, in fact, is no more than intoxication, poisoning by ways of medication, environment, and food, uh, metals, chemicals, etc., etc. That mix in your body and produce, toxins, and you get sick. But this is very importante, muy importante, as I say in Spanish. And in the case of influenza, for example, herpes, the polio or Ebola viruses, each photo as usual shows only single particle. Nobody claims that they are isolated particles, let alone particles that have been isolated from humans. These particles are partially the cellular particles mentioned throughout the book and typical artifacts, which means structures that accrue after inappropriate fixing and drying of the probes while being prepared for the electron microscope. When you have these vials and these probes and these little containers and stuff, and when they add chemicals, you obtain these bacteria and viruses. They call themselves, they label as viruses and bacteria, but they're not. They're simply an effect of what was happening when you add chemicals and stuff like that, right? And we want to talk about Ebola because there is no studies that, for example, SARS-CoV-1 or 2 or hepatitis C or Ebola, HIV, smallpox, poliomyelitis viruses, and the causative agent of BSC have been demonstrated. Complete purification, that means isolation and definition of biochemical properties plus electron micrographs. All you see always is CGI. It's CGI. And that's the way it is. Same with prior to current COVIDian cases. This is a religion belonging to Saint COVID, or whatever you want to call it. And they have used the same assembly methodology that they can be cited as measles, AIDS, hepatitis, flu, papilloma, Zika, and Ebola. So what we're going to check is that where Ebola comes from, like we explained polio before, malaria, Zika, and all these. The disease obviously exists, but it's not produced by any pathogen or any virus or any bacteria, in fact, right? But we're going to check these. And the Ebola first case, suddenly a new virus showed up in Germany around 1967. I'm actually going to play a video so you can see the video, and it'll be a bit more, fun to watch the video. At the same time, I talk about this. So, as I talk about this, let's look for the video. But in 1967, a new virus shows up in what you call Germany, the Republic of Germany, the city of Marburg, and was the first known outbreak of Ebola. It was not in Africa. It was actually first in Germany. But they don't talk about this. They don't want to talk about this because this is like completely blocked and banned by mainstream consensual science. It's not science because they consider science now that it's a democracy. So we have the German city of Marburg, and there, mysteriously, out of the blue, a new virus shows up in the summer of 1967, and a shipment of half a thousand monkeys from Uganda arrived in the city in Germany, in Marburg. Green monkeys, to be more precise. They love green monkeys. They always use green monkeys for everything and to blame everything, you know. And obviously, they bring him from Africa. And they were destined for some pharmaceutical labs in the city that produced the polio vaccine from kidney cells from these green monkeys, green primates. Yeah. So you have two large outbreaks that occurs simultaneously in Marburg and Frankfurt, Germany, and suddenly also in Belgrade, Serbia, where they have another lab. And 1967 led to the identification of the disease for the first time called Ebola. The outbreak was associated with laboratory work involving the production of engineered molecules we call vectors by these monkeys. According to the scientists, the Marburg and Ebola viruses are the two members of the filovirus family. Just don't laugh about it. It's a fucking joke. Imagine that. The two diseases, Marburg, hemorrhagic fever, and Ebola, that are clinically similar: fever, diarrhea, lack of breath, dehydration. No? And the outbreak in Germany occurred in laboratory personnel in charge of cell cultures. What a coincidence. Who had worked with recently imported Ugandan monkeys, green monkeys. They love green monkeys, I told you. Everything that's green, like boogers, they like it because they're a bunch of boogers. These people. 37 people contracted the disease, and 25 cases occur among lab personnel. Curiously and funnily enough, 7 died. Oh my God. God knows why they injected themselves with. That is most likely cause of those dead people. The other cases were 2 doctors, a nurse, an autopsy, a pathologist assistant, and the wife of a veterinarian. If in this laboratory test, synthetic molecules, what we call vectors, were administered to monkeys, and they developed what they call the bacterial disease by drug or medication poisoning, intoxication. So why are we told that it was contagious? Where is the contagion? And why was not Germany isolated as was done before with parts of Africa? So let us draw our own conclusions. After this bacterial intoxication, inverted commas, that the vectors caused to the monkeys and the laboratory workers that injected probably themselves with these toxics, the scientific community in 1976 then decided to silence all this stuff, and then blame West Africa for the origin of the epidemic. And this is where we start the trip in Africa in 1976. Yeah. So we have Africa in 1976. You're watching that there now. I'm just putting a video so we can talk about it really slow and you can understand everything. And you don't need to be a rocket science to understand this. Yeah. Well, hang on, because I have something about Andorra here. All right, let's go a bit forward. All right. So in 1976, they start blaming Africa. So the virus now, instead of being called the Marburg virus, is called the Ebola virus because they blame the Africans now for this, and the monkeys they brought from there, from the river of the Congo Republic. Yeah, Congo. They have a river called Ebola from the area, in order to hide this experiment carried out in Germany. And by the way, days after the incident, 7 dead laboratory employees appear too, another 7. That's curious, right? And remember, in these parts of Congo, Uganda, Ghana, etc., they were trying the new malaria vaccine, the new vax. So they were injecting a lot of people with the vaccine that was obviously toxic, and then they got the symptoms of Ebola. So Ebola is an intoxication from the vaccine. Same that is happening nowadays with the COVID, same COVID, let's call it, because it's a fucking religion too. So worldwide health submitted into chaos by the live medical researchers. The origin of the disease called Ebola has its root in the disease of our, let's say, bacteria being damaged and developed by toxic syndrome in the chromosomes of endogenous bacteria. This pose is a challenge for biologists to prove the truth. This video, obviously, anyone that's a biologist and medical doctor, whatever, should watch this video I'm posting here. So feel free to pass it on and show it to anybody that's a scientist or in the science world, and they'll understand everything I'm saying. In the case of Ebola, the diagnosis of virus due to endogenous bacterial disease must be corrected. It is caused by a toxic syndrome originated by the synthetic biomolecules used in the gene engineering and introduced into human endogenous bacteria as induced inhibitors, or what we call transgenic vectors, and toxic stuff, for example, like aluminum that they put in this stuff, mercury. Now they say, for example, that they're adding graphene, polysorbate 80, things like that. A lot of polyethylene has a lot of things that they put in these jabs, these vials. And now we move on to the missing CDC scientist Timothy Cunningham. Timothy Cunningham was a nice little fella that was working on the Ebola case, and obviously on the vaccines for the CDC. And what happened to him? So basically, he found out, unfortunately, that Ebola didn't exist. There was not such a pathogen for Ebola, because the Ebola pathogen looks like a fragment of a bacteria, what we call E. coli. So suddenly, Timothy is found drowned in the Atlanta River in Georgia, USA, without any apparent suicide note, with all the keys and cars, stuff in his house. So somebody obviously got rid of him or drowned him because he knew too much, and there was no symptoms of any illness or Ebola or nothing. When he was working with the Ebola team, and he was the chief scientist, So Ebola viruses are not viruses. In fact, they are chromosome fragments of our disintegrated Escherichia coli. That is the E. coli. The E. coli, as they call it in the scientific world, is a bacteria. All the fragmented parts of this bacteria, that is actually the prokaryote cell, we all have it, is like a flagellus, look like the bacteria, and they've been labeled as bacteria, but they're not. They're just simple fragments from these, we're going to call it bacteria, like they call it, that lives in your intestines, and its biochemical properties is that it produces cholesterol, it produces insulin, and it eats up mostly of the glucose. So it's a good cell. It has a purpose in life. And there is someone who, comparing this image and the following ones, may believe that Ebola is a virus. So I'm going to show you the images of this. I'm going to put it here, and I'll take it here. And now you can see I'm going to take this video out. And you can see now what they call Ebola and what they call bacteria. So you see here these filaments, this Bacillus spirillate, right? And they call Ebola, this thing. In fact, these are fragments from the chromosome of the E. coli. You can check it. You can see all the different, fragments or parts or pieces of the Monera kingdom. The Monera kingdom is what they call it, is like many prokaryote cells that are bacteria that do, but they do not have a nuclear membrane or a specific shape, and they do not have obviously DNA. The DNA comes from the E. coli. The E. coli, that bacteria that is actually the prokaryotic cell, is the one that has chromosome, that has genes that they pass on to the next generation. But you see the picture here, and that picture basically tells you that is not a virus. That is a part of the bacteria. That's one of the, part of the tissue of the bacteria. They're like spirillose, like these filaments. You see these worms, you can call worms. So it's like a bacillus, but it doesn't do anything. You can see it there also. So Ebola basically is bullshit. huh? And they try to control Africa, scaring the people in Africa. And when they give them jabs or medication, antivirals, they have this disease spreading. It doesn't spread to everyone. Why? Because those that do not get vaxxed or do not get antivirals or medication don't develop the disease, obviously, because they're healthy. Huh? And Ebola appears in these countries: Guinea, Conakry, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast, Democratic Republic of Congo. We talk about it. Gambia, Ghana, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Senegal, and Uganda. Voila. All the countries where you have all these people from the WHO, from the World Health Organization, there are a bunch of killers. They're a bunch of killers, right? So, more about this information, this Ebola mambo jambo scam is all here. We even posted a couple of examples from Spain in which they had an outbreak that was bullshit too, was due to a missionary that developed actually malaria. That's when the mosquito bites you and it transfers a toxic, something that is toxic, not really a virus. But you get a little bit sick, you can even get fever, something a bit weak, and then it's like when a snake bites you. Yeah, obviously, if it gives you some poison or toxin, you can die. But normally, nothing big happens. So you develop the Ebola or a poison, toxic related disease like this. So you can check this in my book. So you should get the book. Yeah, that is the best you can do, and read it. And every single virus, bacteria is explained there. It's all a scam. There's no contagion. There's no infection whatsoever. It's all bullshit. They're gonna try to scare you to implement, a dictatorship, and they can control you. They can digitize you, and you're gonna have to go everywhere with a vaccine passport or whatever, disease-free passport, whatever, like they're doing in China. They tried to do it here in Europe and America for 2 years now. So don't ever get vaxxed. Don't get any medication from all these health amateurs. I hope if there's a doctor, scientist, or whoever listening to this, check into this thoroughly, and you'll see that you get to the same conclusion as I have gotten. And the biggest scam in history. That's a great book for you there. You can get from Amazon, even from stores there if you ask them for the ISBN number or whatever. I have 4 different Nobel Prizes that I have investigated. Karen Mullins, Petersburg, Barbara McKinnon, a lot of them. Viruses do not exist, so forget about it. And there's no contagion. You cannot infect anybody with nothing that doesn't exist. You basically, your body does a detox of whatever you have eaten, you have assimilated from the environment or the air, any toxin or poison or whatever, and expels that, chucks it out, pops it out, and that is what they label themselves as bacteria or whatever. But bacteria is in yeast, insulin. I told you it's the E. coli. It's the only one, the prokaryote that you have inside of you. There's no Monera kingdom or anything. It's a fucking science fiction, all of it, just to scare you. But people, because they read papers and they trust all these peer review papers that they do not demonstrate anything. They just read them, and then somebody else reads another one and another one from previous reports, but they don't get to demonstrate anything. And in labs, they're just manufacturing all these vaccines all the time that they're useless, and they're pseudoscience. Vaccines and medication, 99% they're pseudoscience. Basically, it's like a sect, like a religious sect.
Yeah.
David, there is a hidden history behind measles, and
control your mind.
When Sam and I trained as doctors, they didn't tell us about this, and they presented very selective information. And they said that there was some monkey experiments that were done early last century that proved that measles was highly contagious. Now, that was very disingenuous, because when we actually dug into the history, And I've got a note here. Researchers like Daniel Reuters, our Australian colleague, have done magnificent work digging up all of these old studies. There were a whole lot of studies in the 1800s, and people would be shocked if they knew what they actually did, because you'd never get this stuff approved these days past the ethics committees. So they were taking children, and even young ones, like babies, and trying to give them measles. Yeah. They were doing everything they could. So a researcher would locate a case of a kid that was unwell with what was said to be measles. They'd quickly take snot and tears and even blood from these kids, and then they'd go and try and infect other kids. Mm-hmm. Now, often they'd just squirt it straight up their nose, or, expose their eyes, or just put it on their skin. Sometimes they would actually make wounds to their bodies and introduce this disease material. They would also inject it straight into other children. So they'd take blood from one child said to have measles, inject it into another. Wow. All failures. Didn't work. All they could induce were these local kind of reactions. And they said, because they were so obsessed of showing that there was some sort of contagious element, they said, maybe our techniques are insufficient. There were even techniques where they brought monkeys in and they exposed them to sick humans, and the monkeys didn't get sick. So eventually they resorted to taking blood from people said to have measles and injected it into these monkeys, these rhesus monkeys and other small monkeys. Some, not all, some of the monkeys developed a little bit of a rash around the injection site and a fever. And then they said, well, that proves it. There was a study, 1911, Anderson and Goldberger, and this is the one they'll cite, of saying, well, that's when they showed it was contagious. Now, the rest of us looking at this are saying, this is outrageous, because the WHO and the CDC, they say that measles is an airborne disease. It's transmitted via aerosol, and that just being in the same room with someone is enough to cause you to come down with the case of the measles. Yeah. Clearly, the research never showed that. They had to do these preposterous experiments where they injected animals with human blood. And we know, David, that will cause a reaction, because, and even the human experiments they did, sometimes you'll get a reaction because the blood is not cross-matched appropriately. So you don't need a virus to cause these increases in temperature. And none of them recreated the same illness.